Friends, we turn our gaze now to the first book of Kings. It's a book of transition, of power changing hands, of a nation at a crossroads. We begin not with Solomon, as one might expect, but with his father, the great King David, in the twilight of his reign. David, the shepherd who became a giant slayer, the poet-warrior chosen by God, is nearing the end of his days. His grip on power is weakening, and the kingdom is filled with whispers.
Who will inherit the throne?
The natural heir, Adonijah, a son of David, sees an opportunity. He gathers support and attempts to seize the throne for himself. But David has made a promise, guided by God, that Solomon will be king. Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and the prophet Nathan, a trusted advisor, remind David of his oath. A plan is set in motion. Time is short, and the fate of Israel hangs in the balance. David summons Solomon. The weight of the kingdom, the legacy of his father, is about to be placed upon his young shoulders. David, with his last breath almost, makes Solomon promise to follow God's laws.
I promise, Father, I will follow God's laws.
Solomon, perhaps still wet behind the ears, is quickly anointed king. Adonijah's rebellion crumbles before it truly begins. Solomon shows mercy to his brother, but makes it clear he is the one chosen by God. The kingdom is in awe. This young man, barely out of boyhood, now holds the fate of Israel in his hands. Hope mingles with uncertainty. Will Solomon be a worthy successor to David? Early in his reign, Solomon's wisdom becomes evident. He prays for the ability to govern justly, and God grants him wisdom beyond measure. Stories of his wise judgments spread throughout the land and beyond.
O Lord, grant me the wisdom to govern your people justly.
But Solomon's greatest achievement, the one his name will forever be linked to, is the building of the temple in Jerusalem. David had longed to build a permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant, but it was Solomon who would fulfill this sacred task. The temple becomes a symbol of God's presence amidst his people, a place of worship and sacrifice, the very heart of Israel's religious life. Its construction is a testament to Solomon's leadership, his devotion, and the prosperity of his kingdom. Years pass, and Solomon's reign, though marked by peace and prosperity, begins to be stained by a fatal flaw. The very wisdom that God had granted him seems to desert him. His heart, once fully devoted to God, is swayed by the allure of foreign wives and their idols. He allows the worship of other gods within Israel, a direct violation of God's covenant.
How could I have strayed so far from God's path?
The kingdom, once united under God, begins to fracture. The seeds of discontent are sown, and a darkness begins to creep over Solomon's reign. His legacy, once bright with promise, is now tarnished by his own doing. Section 5. A Kingdom Divided. The sons of Solomon reap the whirlwind. After Solomon's death, the kingdom, weakened by internal strife and burdened by heavy taxes, is ripe for division.
Rehoboam, my son and heir, ascends the throne.
He faces a choice. Will he heed the cries of the people, burdened by Solomon's excesses, or rule with an iron fist?
He chooses poorly, opting for force over compassion.
The kingdom, already strained, splinters. The northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, break away from Rehoboam's rule and establish their own kingdom, called Israel. The southern tribes remain loyal to the Davidic line, forming the kingdom of Judah. What was once a united and powerful nation, forged by the will of God and the leadership of David and Solomon, is now fractured. Solomon's disobedience has cast a long shadow over the land. Section 6. The Northern Kingdom, a tapestry of idolatry and disobedience. The story of the first book of Kings now focuses on the northern kingdom, Israel. It's a tragic tale, friends. The kings who follow Jeroboam, with rare exceptions, turn away from God. They embrace idolatry, worshiping the gods of the surrounding nations. They lead their people astray, indulging in practices that God explicitly forbade. The covenant is broken again and again. One king, Ahab, stands out for his wickedness. He marries Jezebel, a Sidonian princess, and under her influence, the worship of Baal, a Canaanite god, becomes widespread in Israel. The land groans under the weight of their sin. Section 7. Elijah, a voice of fire in a kingdom of ashes. Into this maelstrom of idolatry and disobedience steps Elijah, a prophet of God, a voice crying out in the wilderness. He is a stark contrast to the decadence and corruption of Ahab's court. Elijah challenges Ahab, proclaiming a drought upon the land as a consequence of their worship of Baal. He then challenges the prophets of Baal to a contest on Mount Carmel. They will each prepare a sacrifice, and the God who answers by fire will be acknowledged as the one true God. The prophets of Baal fail miserably, but when Elijah calls upon the Lord, fire falls from heaven, consuming the sacrifice. The people, witnessing this awesome display of God's power, fall prostrate and cry out, "The Lord, He is God." Section 8. Elisha, inheriting the mantle, continuing the struggle. The story of Elijah doesn't end there, of course. He continues to challenge Ahab and Jezebel, confronting them with their wickedness. And when the time comes for Elijah to be taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, his spirit, his mantle, falls upon his disciple, Elisha. Elisha, inheriting a double portion of Elijah's spirit, continues to work miracles and pronounce God's judgment upon the wicked kings of Israel. He heals the sick, raises the dead, and even helps a foreign army by making them blind. Through Elisha, God shows that even in the midst of rebellion and apostasy, His power and compassion are still at work. He has not abandoned His people, even though they have so often turned their backs on Him. Section 9. Echoes of Kings, Wisdom, Failure, and the Steadfast Nature of Faith. The first book of Kings, my friends, is a story of contrasts. The wisdom of Solomon versus his tragic downfall, the splendor of the temple against the backdrop of idolatry, the faithfulness of God amidst the persistent disobedience of His people. It reminds us that wisdom, even when divinely granted, can be squandered. Power, no matter how vast, can corrupt. And even the greatest of human beings are capable of profound failure. But through it all, we see the unwavering faithfulness of God. He raises up prophets like Elijah and Elisha to call His people back to Him. He demonstrates His power and His love, even when faced with rejection. The first book of Kings is a reminder, friends, that our choices have consequences. It's a story about the enduring power of faith and the enduring love of a God who never gives up on His people.